We're all wired up to go? Okay. Okay, again, good evening, everyone. Again, for anyone who's new, we're going through this book by Kala Rinpoche, Profound Buddhism, from Hinayana to Vajrayana. And we are on page 79, which is the common preliminary. So we started out in, again, I think one of the really helpful things about Tibetan Buddhism is that they transmitted the Dharma from the top down, you might say. Tibet was much more powerful politically at the time that the Dharma, they decided to have the Dharma transform their country and culture. And the emperor decided that they would all be Buddhist, or that the kingdom would be Buddhist. And they sent their best and brightest to India over the Himalaya for several centuries, developed a written language for the Tibetan people, and translated the full range of Buddhist teachings as they existed in India like 1,500 years after the Buddha passed away. So this is very significant because India at that time was the greatest development, you might say, of Buddhist culture. And because there's this wide range of methods and approaches, it's like something for everyone if they're so inclined. So it's very skillful. And the Buddhism, as in all the other countries, kind of went serendipitously. Often monks attached to merchants. And so some of the teachings that they had been transmitted to those particular monks would be transmitted to the new country, but not necessarily the whole range. Now, at the same time, that's not a sectarian statement, because if the teachings are based on the Buddhist teaching, and they have been transmitted purely for the sake of liberation and omniscience, they're pure. So in a sense, of all these different teachings, almost any of them can take you, many of them can take you all the way to Buddhahood. But yet we're still different folks with different capacities, different inclinations. And so the skillfulness of this is like the great realized Buddhist teacher becomes like a great physician, can offer many, many different medicines, and can do one medicine for one moment at a time, then another medicine, very skillful in the use of these different techniques. Because in truth, we all need to be tamed, and there are different resistances to being tamed. Even when we say we want to be tamed, the deeper habits are really something else. So the greatness is that you have this full range of teachings, and in order to transmit these to Tibet, the Tibetans developed sort of like conceptual frameworks, which I have to say, as just a 20th century American stumbling around, when I came across these after almost 20 years of Buddhist practice, having that framework was exceptionally helpful, because you have more confidence, because you can sort of see where you're at, so to speak. And also, as far as talking to others, you've got a framework that is just exceptionally helpful. This many kind of conceptual schemes here that allow us to understand the Dharma, allow us to communicate it, allow us to learn. This very basic one is, of course, renunciation, leading to great compassion, leading to pure wisdom. It's just helpful. So today we're starting in this book, again, on the section that's called The Common Preliminaries. Another one of these frameworks, you might say, is, I'm told it was like 200 years ago, there was some sectarianism sort of arising in Tibet. And there was a group of quite exceptional lamas who counteracted this. And they did it by taking teachings from quote unquote rival sects and that. So there was a great unifying of the fundamental faith, although you keep your complete distinct differences of the different traditions and the great schools. Nothing wrong with that at all. Garam Rinpoche has said that all these different teachings are like different facets of the same jewel. So the preliminaries to the Vajrayana. So again, we have self-liberation, which is the renunciation of non-virtue. Then we have the conventional Mahayana, which is benefiting others. And then we have great compassion. Then we have the Vajrayana, which is the practice of pure wisdom, reality itself, rather than the veiled way that we approach reality in our ordinary state. So what happened is in this, again, the early 1800s, some of these great lamas put together this formulation that they call, and we still have it now, called Nundro. It means go before. It means the practices that go before taking empowerment and entering into these serious samayas, these vows of trust and commitment between teacher and student. The very profound practices. Now, these have somewhat become more popularized since probably in Tibet itself, but then certainly even with the Tibet diaspora, empowerments are given out more easily than they used to be. But nonetheless, they all put together this framework of how do you approach these profound teachings. And that's what the Nundro go before teachings are. So that's where we're starting on tonight, the preliminaries to the Vajrayana. But at the same time, they provide such a wonderful approach to understanding of the path. So this is Kalu Rinpoche. Tibetan Buddhism teaches the first steps in practice, again in the Vajrayana, in two groups of preliminaries, the common preliminaries and the specific preliminaries. And in different traditions, sometimes they're called the outer preliminaries and the inner. Page 79. We will study the first group, the common preliminaries, also called the four reflections which turn the mind away from samsara. And these are the precious human existence, death and impermanence, the law of karma, and the defects of samsara. These four preliminaries are called common because they are used by the Nyingma, Sakya, Kagyu, and Gelug lineages in Tibet. Even beyond Tibet, they make up the foundation shared by all Buddhist schools. Without impregnating ourselves with these four reflections, we cannot truly understand why the Dharma is necessary and what its function is. They're so exceptionally important, and yet, relatively little time is spent on them. The Nundro teachings make the point that, if you're building a house, you need to have a solid foundation. And yet we live in this culture that's in such a hurry and think we want to get to this is important, this isn't. We don't have that kind of, solid training. You look at these little Tibetan monks, for instance, in the schools and the monasteries, and you sometimes see videos of them just memorizing, just repeating these texts that they memorize like parrots. And to us, we think, we're so much more sophisticated intellectually and educationally, and we have all our wonderful theories and all of this. But of course, the result of this is that they're learning it by heart, and it stays with them. Apart from the stability of having to memorize like that, the knowledge that comes from it, they don't necessarily are getting the full knowledge then, but they have something then that they work on to penetrate into the meaning, and then, of course, the experience. So, first, the precious human existence. We now possess the precious human existence, characterized by 8 freedoms and 10 qualifications. We do not have space here to examine these freedoms and acquisitions in detail. One can refer to works such as the Ocean of Certainty, the Torch of Certainty, the progressive way of the three types of individuals, or the jewel ornament of liberation. So again, the precious human existence. And he starts out by talking about the drawbacks of the animal realm. The possibilities of existence are divided into 6 classes. 4 of them are not perceptible to our senses. They are the realms of hell, hungry ghosts, demigods, and gods. We only communicate with human beings and animals. Among the latter, the animals, some species, such as nagas that live in oceans or or underground, remain invisible, although they evolve in the same environment as fish, turtles, or insects. Other animals are more closely related to us, whether they are wild, such as tigers, leopards, deer, or domestic, such as dogs, cats, cows, horses, and so on. Animals share a common ground. They cannot understand what we tell them or express themselves other than on a rudimentary level. Their mind is enveloped by an opacity, depriving them of these abilities. They cannot develop faith, devotion, compassion, or transcendent knowledge, qualities that lead towards the superior realms and liberation. If you talk about devotion and compassion to an animal, it cannot understand these notions. It is useless also to teach an animal about anger, aggressiveness, or desire. These defects are naturally present in its mind. The possibilities of spiritual development in animals are almost null because they cannot accumulate merit by physical activities such as prostration and offering of the mandala, or by verbal activities such as reciting mantra and prayers. Their mind cannot cultivate faith or wisdom. Their existence is afflicted by limitations far greater than those of human beings. Not only is it difficult to protect themselves from dangers and difficulties, but they have no possibility of accomplishing virtues that would assure them of happiness and well-being in their future lives. Most often, they kill, steal, and accomplish many negative acts that cause them future suffering. For these reasons, the animal existence is qualified as inferior. Compared with their existence, our situation is preferable. We possess the capacity of understanding what is said, are able to express what we want, and discriminate between positive and negative. Endowed with the support of a good existence, we belong to the superior realms. He's talking about superior realms. Again, they have these coming from ancient India, but these classifications. They talk about the 3 realms sometimes. That name comes up in some of our texts. You know, the formless realm, the realm of subtle form, and then the realm of desire. So now we're talking about the realm of desire. This is the lowest of the 3 realms. But in this realm of desire, sometimes we say there are 6 realms also, so it gets a little confusing. But there are 3 higher realms and 3 lower realms. The lower realms, hell, hungry ghosts, and animals. The 3 higher realms, humans, like the fighting gods, and then the sensual gods. So again, the classifications can help here too, because we don't, they get very, very informative in terms of what are the primary passions that are motivating the different realms. And then you start to see those in yourself. So in a sense, we have all 6 realms within us. And for that matter, we have all 3 realms within us too, even though we don't experience them ordinarily. All right, so the 3 categories of human beings. It is necessary to qualify this general vision of the human condition. Indeed, it is possible to divide human beings into 3 categories. The first group consists of human beings who follow no spiritual path and who always commit negative acts. It is a disastrous human existence because it will necessarily lead to birth into worlds of great suffering. The second category concerns those who neither practice in a spiritual way nor accomplish much negative or positive activity. Their existence is mediocre because it will lead them to be born in a mediocre situation, neither very happy nor very painful. The third category applies to those who know the Dharma, have met masters, and who follow their teachings. In this case, human existence is called precious. Some substances like gold or diamonds are considered precious because their trade value and their accumulation earn all that one wants. Human life dedicated to beneficial and spiritual practice is precious, not because it earns material goods, but because it leads one to receive greater wealth consisting of happiness and liberation. So interesting to me because, you think, why do people accumulate? Why do they want to accumulate money or power and authority? Underneath it all, which is often never looked at, but it's because we want peace and happiness. You feel like you have more power if you have more money, true in a worldly way, although sometimes it's a curse. But nonetheless, we want this peace and happiness. But according to the Dharma, because we're veiled by our ignorance, we don't see the methods by which, we don't see the causes that will produce the effect of peace and happiness. And hence life is a tragedy, therefore. To the value of this existence is added its rarity. Traditionally, it is said that ordinary human beings are as numerous as stars shining in the night sky, while those possessing the precious human existence add up to stars visible in the sky during the day. And the footnote says that's to say the first stars shining in the evening, while the nightfall, or the last few remaining stars in the early morning. Even without this comparison, it is just as easy to look around us and see how few people are committed to a spiritual path. Simply thinking of the city where we live, we will quickly realize that the people who follow a spiritual path are rare. Precious human existence is not something that happens by chance. It is the result of practicing positive acts in our previous lives and of having a connection already established with the Dharma. We now possess this extraordinary condition of life. We should be fully conscious of its value in order to make it meaningful. This is why we should reflect on the freedoms and qualifications that characterize it, reflecting also on the condition of other beings, such as hell beings, hungry ghosts, demigods, and gods to better understand by comparison, the exceptional characteristics of our situation. We will waste our precious existence if we do not use it to practice the Dharma. So that's the first one of these thoughts that turns the mind to Dharma, the precious human existence. And as you look around the world, you see how very few people really are there with that, even if they're not on a spiritual path. People aren't even seeking. We don't really treat this birth as precious as it really is. When you have some idea of, if you can imagine lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, the scope of this, or if you can go in the other direction and just see all the life forms that are out there just on this little planet. And then you see to have this kind of fortunate situation where you suddenly recognize the importance of the Dharma, and therefore the rarity and the value and the power of this precious human existence. It changes things. So this is the beginning of the path. We're going to move on to impermanence now, but in one of the texts that he just talked about, the Torch of Certainty, that's an interview with Chogyam Trungpa, Dejang Rinpoche, and I think there was a Karma Kagyu Lama in there too. Anyway, it was an interview on the Nundro teachings. And Trungpa, I think, said in there once that the greatness of having this sort of ladder of understanding, this framework, is that if you're having really doubts about impermanence, for instance, you just go back to precious human life and you really bore into the understanding of the precious human life, and impermanence is part of that. So you have the confidence then to go into impermanence. The same thing with the other four thoughts. Wherever you're stuck, you can just go backwards. So it's very helpful because, yes, it's like climbing a ladder, but it's not that we don't go up and down a little bit, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. we're human beings. This isn't mechanics. So, second thought that turns the mind to Dharma: impermanence. Although precious, our existence is not eternal. It is subject to impermanence. An unceasing flow. Impermanence characterizes all phenomenon, the universe as well as the beings who inhabit it. The succession of seasons is a good example. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter show the unceasing play of change. The shorter the duration that we observe, the less obvious is impermanence. It is nevertheless present from instant to instant. The year cannot exist without the 12 months composing it. Months do not exist without days. Days do not exist without hours. Hours do not exist without minutes. Minutes do not exist without seconds, and so on. In this uninterrupted succession, our life unfolds and exhausts itself. At the end, whatever we have had of precious human existence, if it has not been put to good use, it will simply disappear. Nothing will remain. If we do not apply ourselves now to the practice of the Dharma, it will soon be too late. The opportunity will have been lost forever. So that's the unceasing flow of impermanence. Next is the end of a dream. From a certain point of view, temporal preoccupations are not totally vain. We need to eat, dress, and to find shelter. However, we should not grant too great an importance to the affairs of this world. Accumulating material goods in this lifetime cannot assure us that we will be able to take anything with us. We have to leave everything behind. Our lives will be beautiful dreams ending. Nothing will go with us. Milarepa said, "Fearing death and impermanence, I flew into the mountains. I meditated there and reached the level that transcends death and impermanence." Impermanence does not proceed by jumps, but is inscribed in the succession of instants. Let us take the example of a 70-year-old person. This person is old, but it does not mean that old age has happened at a precise moment. The process of aging is uninterrupted and was unfolding during the life of this person. Some wag made the statement once that, this is back in the 50s that I first heard it, saying that he thought the reason that the British were attached to still hanging criminals is because it was like a metaphor for life. You jump off the scaffold with a rope around your neck, and at some point it comes to an end, but you do have a little time on the way down. Next is never forget impermanence. When we are taken in by the many activities of this world and fall under its influence, it is essential to never forget impermanence and to remind ourselves that death will not fail to come. We should take advantage of the time remaining to us. Again, the example of Milarepa is instructive. He had suffered in some periods of his life from extreme cold, severe lack of food, and having threats made on his life. He never became discouraged. He thought, whether I am cold, hungry, or dying, all this is secondary. What is important to me now, before impermanence takes me away, is that I practice meditation. And the last part then here under impermanence is Jigme Lingpa does not repair the steps. The story of Jigme Lingpa perfectly illustrates the concern for the essential. He lived secluded in a cave that could be accessed by stairs. However, the stairs, after many years, had considerably decayed, and Jigme Lingpa sometimes thought of repairing them. When he was in his cave and this thought arose, instead of following it, he told himself, if I undertake these repairs now and death comes, I would have wasted my time. It's better that I meditate. When he was outside the cave and the same concern arose again in his mind, he thought, death may be near. Better that I return to meditate. Recalling impermanence instilled so much diligence in him that he was able to attain realization. We should be convinced of the possibility that death is nearby. Then surely we will escape distractions that the outer world puts on us, and we will pour a lot of energy into our practice. We know that old age, sickness, and death exist, but we think that they will not happen to us soon. But we cannot help ourselves by granting a certain permanence to the world and ourselves. While engaging on the path of Dharma, we learn on the contrary to recognize everything is impermanent. And so this is, especially useful because we can be doing our worldly activities, but instead we're not completely overtaken by them. That's the thing. They're all done in the scope of this understanding of impermanence and the necessity for the Dharma. So that awareness of not being completely, distracted by or sucked into your worldly activities, that is Dharma practice. You might not be saying mantra, you may not be visualizing the guru above your head, or even thinking that you're practicing mindfulness, any of that. But that awareness of impermanence is the Dharma. Buddha said, he talked about, different sort of the import of different teachings. He talked about a deer runs over wet sand on the beach, and, little tiny hoof prints and a little bit of water can collect in there. A human, and the footprints bigger, more water. But the elephant makes this big hole. And he said that the teachings of impermanence are like the elephant's footprints. It's just the biggest, makes the most weight, so to speak, the most momentum or inertia in terms of our practice. So you can do everything, In fact, sort of bitching and moaning about what one's worldly situation is just a worse distraction than just being in it, but again, with this awareness, this comprehension of impermanence, like something on your shoulder never leaves. So we've had the precious human birth, then impermanence, and next is the law of karma, so cause and effect. Having understood the exceptional opportunity given to us by this precious human existence, and becoming conscious of its transitory nature, we should know the rules governing its use and study the infallible law of karma. The Tibetan expression for karma is composed of 3 words, le gyu dre, and comprehends its principle. Le means act, including our personality. What we do with our body, speech, and mind are acts. Gyu means cause. All our acts, positive or negative, leave an imprint in our mind as the cause of a future event. Dre means result. Proceeding from negative or positive causes, acts produce corresponding results in the form of painful or happy situations. The law of karma means that our acts, according to their nature, are causes engendering defined results. So first of all, note the fundamental harmony here. Cause, the results are in accord with their cause. So we're no longer living in a random universe. Instead, we're starting to have understanding on it and seeing the deeper unity there, you might say. So it's a tremendous step. And, I just don't know. This seems to be sort of approached in a kind of a partial way or a non-articulated way in other religions. They just sort of leave it up to God, I guess. But for the Buddhists, there's this very detailed analysis that you can go into. It's said that only the Buddhas completely understand karma. So it's very profound. But basically, you can sum up all Buddhism into emptiness and cause and effect. Cause and effect, everything that's called Buddhism is just cause and effect. So the absolute teachings are emptiness, wisdom, whatever you want to say. And the conventional teachings, the relative, the developing teachings, are the cause and effect. So the cause and effect is extremely important, but not only for just sort of the guidelines of this kind of behavior leads to this, but to see that underlying unity You can't do hateful things and then somehow expect to have some peaceful thing come out of that. Now we're misled because karma is so complex and things ripen at different times. And we're talking about, astronomical stretches of time. So you can have someone who's being angry and kills all his enemies, and there's a sort of a peace at that time, but it's not a stable peace. It's not a true peace, and things change. And we see that in our lives. I mean, recently things seem to have sped up some way, maybe because of the internet and that. You kind of see a more instant cause and effect now, it seems. But nonetheless. All right, so the law of karma. Negative and positive. Acts are called negative when they result in suffering in the future for the one who initiates them. Their nature is described in detail in several texts, but they can be summarized in 10 categories. So this is what Kempo is always talking about. 3 negative acts of the body: taking life, taking what is not given, incorrect sexual conduct. 4 negative acts of speech: lying, harmful words, words creating discord, trivial words. 3 negative acts of the mind: covetousness, malevolence, erroneous view. Acts are caused positive when they bring happiness to the one who initiated them. This is another way of seeing the falsity of anger and hatred, for instance, because even the kind of false peace that comes from, let's say, you wipe out your enemies, that peace is not the real peace. And what I mean by that, it's a peace that's based on the uncertainty. If those people were there wouldn't be peace. So it's not peace with a capital P, like the Bible says, the peace that passeth all understanding. As long as we have these conditions that have to be out there just perfect, and then we can call ourselves peace. It's like someone said, another historian once said that, peace is just like this, a small break in between war. That's not the peace that the Dharma is talking about, although, can appear that way. All right, so 3 negative acts of the mind: covetousness, malevolence, erroneous views. Acts are called positive when they bring happiness to the one who initiated them. They are the opposite of the 10 negative acts: protecting life instead of killing, cultivating benevolence instead of malevolence, and so on. So generally, negative acts lead to rebirth in inferior realms, such as hells, hungry ghosts, and animals. Positive acts produce rebirth in the superior realms, such as human, demigods, and gods. See if he says something about, not sure that he's going to, but it's important to understand here that this isn't kind of like because karma is so complex and we are such a bundle of past causes that, say like killing, doesn't mean that one is automatically reborn in hell. You can take birth, all things considered, in a human realm again. But what happens is, because of the killing karma, you're in a very poor kind of state, a state where there's lots of hostility towards you for no good reason, of your own or any outer kind of reason. You're just born in that kind of a situation. You're like a very suppressed people in a tyrannical realm. You just, there you are. So karma, the result, always accords with the cause, but it doesn't necessarily completely, create the whole situation, because there are many competing kind of causes in our mind. Demigods are sometimes called the Asuras, the fighting gods. So in the painting of the 6 realms, the human beings have planted a tree, and there's this tree that's growing up in the human realm, but it's flowering and with fruits in the demigod realm. And so the other way around, the tree is planted in the Ashura realm, but the fruits of it. So this is the frustration of being a fighting god, because you have this kind of divine existence. You've planted this tree everything's beautiful, wonderful, but the fruits are somehow in the next step up. And so they're always fighting over the fruits. They're always fighting, trying to get these fruits. So although they have this wonderful situation, I don't know, it's kind of like here, you read about some tyrants or something. They have all the wealth and the power in their kingdom, and yet they're always pissed off. It's not enough.
Sounds like work.
Right. All right. So present as a result of the past. Be present as a result of the past. Still talking about karma, cause and effect. If present acts condition our future lives, past acts have conditioned our present life. That we possess human existence is the result of past positive acts. If we are in this lifetime often sick, or if we die at a young age, we can be sure that we have killed or wounded other beings. The variety of human destinies is extremely great. Some people have a short life, others a long life. Some enjoy a good health, and others suffer from illness. Some people are wealthy, others are poor. Most people have no explanation for this diversity. It is so, they simply think. In reality, there is no chance happening. The disparity of destinies is due to the disparity of karmas. Many stories illustrate this fact. So he's going to tell some stories now. First is the kind shade. A long time ago, there were two men whose ways of thinking were completely opposite. They lived in the same country. The first man was always tormented by compulsive thoughts of killing, stealing, and swindling others. His dream was to kill the king of the country and ascend to the throne. The second man thought only of benefiting others and sometimes had the dream, if I were to govern, I would do everything for the happiness of the people. One day, as the first man walked on the side of a road, he slipped and fell. At this precise moment, a chariot passed and one of the wheels rolled over his neck and cut off his head. The other man had fallen asleep in the shade of a tree. At this very moment, the people of a certain country were seeking someone to govern them. They needed a man with great positive karma. When they approached the sleeping man, hours had flowed by, and the shade of the trees had shifted, all except for the tree sheltering the sleeping man. The visitors understood that this miracle could only be the sign of excellent karma. They promoted the man chief of their country, and thanks to his government, the people lived in prosperity. These are the kind of stories that Tibetans love, and for us don't work so well. Golden rice ears. At the time of the Buddha, an odd couple who worked hard all their lives lived in India. The man and the woman had great faith in the Buddha and deep confidence in Dharma, but they lacked time to practice. They were getting old and confided to each other, "We have hardly devoted ourselves to the Dharma. Before dying, we must do some act that will allow us to accumulate merit." As they were not well off, they had not much to offer. After thinking about what they could do, they decided to invite Shariputra for a meal, and as one of the Buddha's greatest disciples, make offerings to him. Yeah, Putra means son, and Shari means crow. So there's some speculation by scholars that he was in a matriarchal lineage that had like a crow for like a totem. There's just so much that we just don't know. So invite Shariputra for a meal and make offerings to him. So they did. This simple act provoked great change in their lives. They possessed a small field, and suddenly their rice was now producing ears of gold. News of this miracle spread rapidly and was not long in reaching the king. Somewhat doubtful, he requested verification. Yes, the field was producing gold. Dazzled by such a treasure, the king could not resist appropriating it for himself. He deeded his own fields to the old couple for the field producing gold ears of rice. The king's decree was enforced. Unfortunately, the field belonged to him, but the merit remained with the old couple. As soon as the trade was made, the small field started to produce ordinary grain, Well, the newly acquired property of the couple was turning out gold. Disappointed, the king decided to reverse the trade. Gold production resumed on the old couple's property. 7 times in a row, the king reversed the traded property, and 7 times in a row, the gold went to the old people. The king finally had to admit that he could not take possession of the gold. Only the positive karma of the 2 old people could produce gold grain, and lacking this one, could only harvest rice. The Buddha delivered 84,000 types of teachings. Their foundation is the law of karma. It is absolutely necessary to understand this, to validate its truth, and to do everything possible to abandon negative acts and practice positive acts. And the teaching of cause and effect have the immediate result of lessening the intensity of samsara. Because if you think that this, just experiencing our own suffering, that there's just like nothing we can do about it, nothing that could have been done about it, it just seems so completely unfair in this, vicious kind of world. And so you feel trapped, and the not knowing in itself is suffering. But with the law of karma, there exists the possibility, and I think of it sometimes they talk about, can't remember what the Greek story is, but remember Pandora was given a box and told not to open it, and she opened it up, and all the bad things in the world flew out of it. She had done something wrong. But the last thing that came out was hope. So there was still this hope, which, ameliorates if only just a smidgen, the absolute horror of all the evils of the world. So too here with karma, the understanding, even the possibility that maybe there's something we can do, that we are not completely disempowered, has this calming effect. All right, so those are the 3 thoughts: precious human life, impermanence, cause and effect, and then finally the 4th thought that turns the mind to the Dharma, the defects of samsara. Understanding karma well and using this understanding to turn away from samsara implies that we perceive how karma engenders the suffering of the 6 classes of beings. The 4th preliminary reflection leads us to become conscious of this suffering and to be touched deeply with the idea that samsara is defective by nature because it never escapes the play of suffering. Hell realms are the most painful of all existing worlds. There are the traditional 18 kinds of hell, 8 great burning hells, 8 great freezing hells, peripheral hells, and an occasional hell, distinguished by the variety and intensity of torments. Karmically, hells are for the most part caused by hatred and anger, as well as by murder. There are other causes that can also engender them. In the hungry ghost realm, the second of the 6 realms, beings are afflicted by a great amount of suffering. The chief affliction is to be continually tormented by hunger and unquenchable thirst. Stealing and possessiveness are causes leading beings to this rebirth. Animals are classified as visible and invisible animals, such as nagas. Rebirth in the animal realm is induced by blindness, more particularly by lack of spiritual perspective, and by refusing to acknowledge the validity of the law of karma. Hells, hungry ghosts, and animals are the 3 inferior realms. The human realm forms the first of the 3 superior realms. Suffering, although less intense, is present nevertheless. The 4 main sufferings are recognized as birth, old age, sickness, and death. However, these sufferings are accompanied by many others, such as suffering of not obtaining what one wants, to be dispossessed of what one possesses, to be separated from loved ones, and to be associated with beings that one does not like. The texts list and describe in detail all kinds of difficulties met by humans, but our own experience is enough to present a precise and vivid idea of them. As for the demigods and gods, the former suffer from quarrels and continual conflict, and the latter suffer from falling from their state and from the transmigration to lower realms. If we do not take advantage of our precious human existence, we will not make progress to superior realms and to liberation. We will remain inescapably imprisoned by samsara. We become conscious of samsara by knowing the suffering of the different classes of beings, and even more by observing our own situation and that of people around us. Seeing that in samsara nobody escapes suffering, we will energetically engage in the Dharma. Now he's going to tell a story called The Mouse and the Turquoise. Longri Tangpa, a great Lama of Tibet, continually reflected on the suffering of the beings held prisoners of samsara. Nobody had seen him laugh or even smile. He had earned the nickname of Longri Tangpa Longface. During a ritual, he proceeded to offer the mandala. And there's a footnote here, offering of the mandala is a short ritual or part of a ritual during which the practitioner imagines that he or she offers to the Buddha, yidams, or the lamas, the universe and all it contains. This offering is materially symbolized by a small copper or silver disc called the basis, upon which rice and sometimes precious stones are piled. All right, so during a ritual, he proceeded to offer the mandala. He had placed in front of him the basis with a large turquoise placed in the middle of the rice. So again, it's like a silver plate, sometimes a silver bowl turned upside down, and you pile rice on this. And then, so he had a pile of rice, but he had a turquoise in the middle of that. A mouse passed by, and rather than choosing the rice, wanted the turquoise. But the turquoise was large, and the mouse was too small to accomplish its goal. After many attempts, it let out a small, piercing squeal. Immediately, another small mouse came to help. The first mouse began to push, and the second pulled. Finally, they succeeded in stealing the blue stone. Longri Tangpa was so amused by this spectacle that he burst out laughing. The disciple who was nearby could scarcely believe his ears. His master was laughing, he who had never been heard laughing throughout his entire life. What provoked so extraordinary an event? He could not restrain himself from asking Longri Tangpa. Quote, "Two small mice have teamed up to take a large turquoise," he replied. "It was hilarious." As ordinary beings, we commit three fundamental errors in viewing the world. We take as permanent what is impermanent. We take as happiness what is suffering. We take as real what is unreal. All phenomena are only a projection of the mind, lacking any reality in themselves. So, taking the impermanent, what is impermanent, appears to us as being permanent. We take what is suffering as being happiness, and we take what is unreal for being real. These are called the aparishas, the upside downs. And there's Sanskrit terms for them too, of course, but this is the basis of dukkha, the first noble truth. These three errors prevent us from turning away from samsara. Letting the four reflections that we just saw penetrate into ourselves allows us, on the contrary, to understand the meaningless characteristic of samsara and to turn towards liberation. So you can see from this, here we are in these four thoughts that turn the mind, right? This is all preliminary. And so like most Americans, we say preliminary, oh, I know that stuff. But you see the wisdom nature of this, because right away, this is all based on this ignorance, this not knowing. It's not that people are stupid. It's just that they're veiled. And this is exactly it, because this world looks permanent, so we act as if it is permanent, and we're not in accord with reality. We see situations that we think are happiness. I mean, I think of Hollywood all the time and the rappers and all of this stuff. And yet it's actually suffering. We take as real what is unreal. And so, we fight, we steal, we're jealous, all of these kinds of things, extreme competitiveness, all of these things. We're just not seeing it right. And so the antidote is to see things right. That is wisdom. knowledge leading to wisdom. But of course, how do you do that? Well, the knowledge comes from thinking about it, from hearing the teachings and then analyzing, working on it in your mind, and then trying to put it into practice through experience. And then naturally, you see how things are. And that's a great, the great stability, the great value of a great Lama is that, you don't have to worry about them making a mistake because they're living in that correctness from the get-go. So no matter what is confronted, the most difficult situations, simple ones, when to speak, when not to speak, all of that becomes clear. All right, finally, a necessary implanting. Sometimes we think that it is sufficient just to know these 4 ideas, to hear the Lamas talk about them, or to read about them in books. But it is necessary to go further. We must meditate on them, reflect upon them, and let them penetrate into our lives. This is the other thing that's so beautiful about the Dharma, because you see, and he's discussing here, this is, just what that classic framework that I just mentioned, we must meditate on them. And in this sense, it means to hear them, reflect upon them, to analyze, and let them penetrate into our lives. That's typically called the meditation, the experiential part of meditation. So in English, to meditate on someone can just be to be sort of thinking on it a little bit, and then the deeper analysis. But when we're talking about meditation in the Buddhist sense, that's penetrating into our lives. By the example of the precious human existence, we should understand the factors characterizing it, how these factors apply to us, and how to escape unfavorable conditions of existence in the future. We must apply personal reflection to the 4 ideas. By implanting the 4 common preliminaries in ourselves, we build the foundation that provides a solid basis for our practice. This will prevent us from being carried away by laziness and indifference. So maybe a good place to stop next time is the links between body and mind, which I think might be the unconventional preliminaries. Okay, any thoughts or ideas from anybody? When we, way back when, at the very beginning, the founding Lama here in Rochester said it would be his wish for people to spend 6 months working on the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. It shows you kind of the paucity of our modern existence that, no one can do that. It's extremely, extremely rare. Even the people that are doing like 3-year retreats, don't do that. There's just, when we were in Tibet, we were driving down the main river that flows by Lhasa, the Sangpo, it becomes the Brahmaputra when it gets to India. And, I looked up in this mountain. It's like Adirondack Mountains, not a snow mountain, but looked up, and here was this tiny little hermitage up there. And you knew there was someone up there who was just doing this full time. And then you can see the kind of stability that comes from that kind of deep convincing of yourself of the truth of these things. And of course, if they're false, you discover that. But the whole point is that complete, committed investigation of our mind.
Someone came up with the businessman's number.
Yeah, right. That's yeah, absolutely.
Who is this?
Absolutely. That was Lama Tarchin. Yeah, the Dujum Tersar Nundro. He joked about it. Had different Nundros, but that one was specifically brief so the Westerners could do it. Yeah.
Is that one shorter than the other?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah. Of course.
I like the little story about the mouse a lot because, you just don't think about mice cooperating in that way in order to get the turquoise. Mm-hmm. So, and that the rather maybe stern Lama with no sense of humor all of a sudden was laughing hysterically. So I like that part. this is kind of unrelated, but kind of related. Lately, and I don't know why, but like every time I seem to hear teachings, people say something about emptiness and interdependence and the relationship between the two.
Uh-huh.
But they never go any further.
Uh-huh.
So like Kempo has said, someday we'll talk about emptiness and interdependence. And that's been swirling around in my mind for about a month. And I just wonder if you could touch on that a little bit, please. Thank you.
Some even say with impermanence, for instance, this is like the starting of the understanding of emptiness. That even in this gross outer way that we think of things, with impermanence, with the understanding of impermanence, we know they're not going to last. So even though they appear to be solid, real, and kind of eternally existing, that reality, that gross misunderstanding, although it can appear that way to our senses, is eroded a little bit by just thinking about impermanence. That's why the Buddha said it's the greatest teaching is the teaching of impermanence. But then you go a little bit farther and you see how is that thing existing right now and the interdependence of all these various factors. So even like you've heard me say our breakfast cereal, and there it is in this box. What came together just to produce that box, unbelievable. Somebody had to grow a tree, cut the tree down, turn it into pulp, turn it into paper, just the right kind of cardboard, had to print on it. They needed the ink. They needed the materials for that. I mean, that's for the box, let alone the food, what's involved in all of that. So this thing that I just eat my Cheerios, that's the level in which we all live. And yet you start to think about it and it becomes vast. So that vastness is kind of leading you towards emptiness itself, that even those particles are not existing unto themselves, but they exist only in relation to other things, and there's nothing you can grab onto. So intellectually, this is, quite a discovery. But of course, the Buddha Dharma is more than that. It's meditating on it and actually having that understanding arise in your mind. But of course, on the way, it's so completely helpful because instead of an enemy, as being this solid opposing force, unchanging, just characteristic of bad that you can bet on, it's not that way. So there's meeting with some peace, there's some compassion, there's some understanding. If it's just lessening of hatred or whatever the situation is, the attachment, whatever. So impermanence leads to, and then there's one, I don't know if it's a sutra, it might be, but they're talking about the 18 different types of emptiness. Lama Govinda went to visit a lama in Tibet, and he had all sorts of difficulties getting there. I mean, there was like a hailstorm and all sorts of stuff. And someone told him this was actually a good thing. It's like purification, he wanted to see this particular lama. And when he got there, I don't know that he knew what he was even asking for, but the lama immediately started talking to him about the 18 different types of emptiness. So it's like they're ever increasing subtleties, and impermanence is kind of the thing that the interdependence rather is the easiest way for people to see that right out of the get-go. Because, yeah. But we'll have to have Kempo teach more on that. I think part of the reason he hesitates is for those profound subjects, he wants to have a good translator. And poor Megan's been putting him off because she's been under such pressure. So maybe that'll change now. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Not a bad place to stop, but also I think just such an important topic. The four thoughts. It really keeps your head on straight for sure. And again, that backwards trick is something that I've always liked. If someone's having trouble with the suffering nature of samsara, always trying to find some sort of refuge in samsara and the deepening understanding of what samsara means, not just this outer, but our own inner samsara, where this is obviously a projection of our own mind. So when we have trouble with that the again, dissatisfactory nature of all of this, that there's no sort of little hiding place that we can have that really does the trick. When we have difficulty with that, we go back to the teachings on cause and effect. When we have difficulty with the teachings on cause and effect, which is very common, you go back to impermanence. And then when we have trouble with impermanence, we go back to the precious human life, this unbelievable opportunity we have. And, it can be utilized to different lengths. You can be Milarepa, you can be the fellow in the old lady in the Buddha's time who didn't do any practice in anything, but just threw a big handful of dust visualized as gold at the Buddha when he came into town. But these things are so significant because, again, in this incredible multiplicity of phenomena and appearances and universes, these modern telescopes are really helpful for us in that way. You know the vastness. And in all of that, to come across these teachings that are really the core of the whole thing, the creation of this whole world in our very mind. I mean, the teaching's too good to be true. But nonetheless, these four thoughts, you can build on them. Okay?
You always tell us how vast. It's amazing when you always tell us how vast space is, and how vast as you get narrower and narrower, like how vast these teachings are. But then, how vast is this little, dust particle?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And how much is in that dust particle when you go into the small scale?
But it still gets big.
Right. Yeah, I can't remember what it is. Someone used to know this, forgive me, but the electron going around the nucleus of an atom, I think if you put that in scale, I think it's something like the sun and Mars, something like that. I'm not sure. We have to check on that. But, so even in that incredible tiny space, there's still kind of a vastness,
Yeah.
That's emptiness too.
But it also reminds me of how vast, the teachings are. I mean, because that's even, like, teaching isn't even a thing, really. I mean, it's a noun and everything. You know what I mean? It's thoughts, basically.
Yeah. You can't grab onto that either. And I think it's also true that in the scale of the things, the size of the known universe, and then the size of the smallest kind of subatomic particle, human beings are right in the middle. We're the middle way in our very existence. In scale, we're just like, there we are, right in the middle. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool. Okay. We dedicate the merit from this evening to all motherly sentient beings. May there be peace in the world. May every last one discover the peace within their own heart and not be tricked. And may every last one work for every last one. Okay. Thank you all. Yeah, I like the fact too that the mouse is going for the turquoise instead of the rice.
Do something.
Fortunate karma.
The other thing that helps you think about a precious human birth is death. I was having my heart attack.
Yeah. Well, that's impermanence. Exactly right. Exactly right. With impermanence, you have a much deeper understanding of the precious human birth. It starts out, they're talking about the, 8 freedoms and the 10 foundations or whatever it is. And it's nice, you read all that stuff and it's helpful. Oh, goodbye, Zoomers.
Oh, goodbye.
Thank you. Oh, wonderful. Roberta.
They're the ones from Montreal.
Yeah, this is kind of like, we can see some of the animals that are close to us in the human realm, but we can't see the Nagas. We can't see the Zoomers until we get a screen of them. Sorry, but good night. Thank you for being here.
waving goodbye.
Good.